Alright, so this is a movie that just kept getting pushed back more and more. I think the first time I saw trailers was somewhere around early 2013, unless I'm completely mistaken. And I think it was supposed to be a summer movie for that year, but then it got pushed back to December, and then it got pushed back to finally February of 2014. But of course, it didn't come out then. And now we are finally getting it in 2015. On February we got it. And so now we get to see the movie, finally. And I also thought it was kind of funny that the marketing didn't even bother to change the date. In fact, they had the same trailer all through those years. And then finally when they stopped doing coming soon to theaters, then did the February of 2014. And it got pushed back to 2015. They didn't even bother changing it. So I remember we were in theaters for January for some reason, and Seventh Son popped up, and it shows at the end, coming to theaters in February of 2014. And I remember someone in the theater asking, well, why isn't it out then? And I also found it was quite ironic that it ended up coming out the same week of Jupiter Ascending. Another movie that was supposed to be a summer movie that got pushed back to February of the next year. So Seventh Son is one of those early February movies that seems like it should have been out in January. And of course it's one of the films that just gets crapped on a ton. I don't think it's bad enough to deserve all that crap. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is an excellent or even good film, but it does have some redeemable qualities, in my opinion. So Seventh Son is about these special warriors that are the seventh sons of seventh sons. And because they're seventh sons, they get these special powers, and they use those powers to defeat these evil witches and bad monsters and all kinds of stuff. So Jeff Bridges is this seventh son, and at the beginning of the movie he loses his apprentice, who's played by Kit Harington, and most would know as Jon Snow. And he loses his apprentice, and now he needs a new one. And so in comes our main hero, who he picks up and takes and decides to train to be the next seventh son. And meanwhile, Julianne Moore is this evil witch that is trying to take over the world, and the seven sons have to stop her. So you know how I do these reviews. Let's start with the good and then we'll get to the bad. First off, I did like the story. The whole seven sons folklore isn't really used that often, and some might not even know about it. It's a pretty obscure thing, and while they did do it in a way that makes it a little bit more generic and done before when it comes to fantasies, I still appreciate that they used it. Now, even though I do like the story, I have to admit that it is a bit generic and lots of it has been done before. But fantasy films, along with horror films, are one of the sort of things that I don't mind, even if it's a generic plot. I don't know, I'm a little bit more optimistic when it comes to those genres. Probably because, I don't know, they're just my favorite genres. Now, I did like the main character a lot, and I thought he was portrayed well by Ben Barnes, who you might know him in the Chronicles of Narnia movies, because he's Prince Caspian, if you remember any of those. And yeah, your main character is typical to the fantasy realm. It's the typical peasant farmer that happens to be destined for greatness, that has a noble heart. And that kind of hero has been done numerous times. But I felt that Ben Barnes did a good job at portraying that character, and I liked the character. And I did like the acting of the witch that our main hero falls in love with. She's played by Alyssa Vikander, if I'm pronouncing that right. And you might not know her yet, but she is in this movie that's coming up. I think the UK has it before us, but it's Ex Machina, and she's the artificial intelligence in that movie, so that one looks really good. Really, really good. And then usually when there's a romance put into these type of movies, it usually feels forced and just out of place. But in this one, it felt believable, and I felt the chemistry between the two characters. Now, am I saying it was a great romance? No, it's not, but it's believable, and that's all that really matters. And I like the design of the creatures. They looked really cool, really epic, and so yeah, that's all I have to say good about the film. Unfortunately, most of this stuff is a little bit more generic, and people won't care too much about that, so if that's not enough for you for the movie, then you're probably not going to like this movie. Now let's get to the bad. So as the acting goes, most of it was either fine, mediocre, or just acceptable. Julianne Moore and Jeff Bridges were obviously the biggest stars of the movie, and oftentimes they did excel and do better than everyone else for obvious reasons. But there are also some scenes in there for both of them where it didn't feel as good and it was inconsistent and just there's some awful scenes. Now I don't know if I can't grasp if it was either the script or the bad direction or the bad acting or bad characters, but it's probably one of those, if not a few of those things. While the creatures were awesome, there are some times where it didn't make sense, such as the creatures could take human form, that's obvious, and then they turn into monsters, and then there's times where they obviously could do way better as a monster, and then they get suckered into taking their human form and then get killed. It was just one of those things, like action movies have some sort of excuse to keep your main hero alive, and so they have the bad character do something stupid, like Taken 3, for example. There's this part where the bad guy totally has Liam Neeson. He could kill him right then and there. Liam Neeson has no more ammo, he's on the ground, and the bad guy has a machine gun. Instead of shooting him, he decides to kick him around and hit him with the gun, and yeah, things like it feels like that when some of the monsters don't turn into monsters and fight as humans. There are also times when the story feels like it's a mixture of R.I.P.D. with Hansel and Gretel witch hunters, and that's never a good sign. I do believe that Seventh Son is better than both of those movies, but that could be just me liking fantasy films. Disappointingly, Seventh Son also feels like it took notes from the first Ghost Rider movie. Yeah, it felt like let's put as many villains and monsters as possible in it, but since we can't handle doing really good fight scenes, let's have all the fight scenes really quick and just add more villains so that it makes it look like there's more fight scenes than there really is. Now, none of the fight scenes were as bad as Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider, all you had to do was literally just hit them with the chain, they're dead, and that's the end of the story. It's different with Seventh Son. There's a little bit more fighting, but still it feels really short. Ultimately, Seventh Son, I like the characters, I like the story, I liked a few things about it, but ultimately most people are definitely going to think it's generic and dull, which I totally understand. For me, I'm giving Seventh Son 2 stars. 2 stars. Okay, have you seen Seventh Son? What did you think about it? Go ahead and comment. I'm open for discussion. If you haven't seen Seventh Son, if you're one of the smart people that decided not to go at all, then what is your favorite fantasy movie of all time? Again, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was Just My Opinion.